chapter number 5 and verse 1. Stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. Now, Paul is simply saying here for the Galatian believers to stand fast in the grace of which they had received. All right, verses 2 through 4. Behold, I, Paul, say unto you that if ye be circumcised, Christ shall profit you nothing. For I testify again to every man that is circumcised that he is a debtor to do the whole law. Christ is become of none effect unto you. Whosoever of you are justified by the law, ye are fallen from grace. Now, what Paul is saying here, to get saved by trusting Christ, and then to turn to a life of trying to be justified by the law, is the fallen from grace status. To leave the truth of the gospel of Jesus Christ, to turn to the Mosaic law, is fallen from grace. All right, let's look at verses 5 and 6. For we through the Spirit wait for the hope of righteousness by faith. For in Jesus Christ neither circumcision availeth anything nor uncircumcision, but faith which worketh by love. Listen, circumcision or uncircumcision means nothing. The formula for the Christian life is this: faith which works by love. Ye did run well. Who did it hinder you that you should not obey the truth? This persuasion cometh not of him that calleth you. A little leaven leaveneth the whole lump. I have confidence in you through the Lord, that ye will be none otherwise minded, but he that troubleth you shall bear his judgment, whosoever he be. Now, the Galatian believers were doing well until they allowed the Judaizers to deceive them. Then we see the importance to immediately stopping false teachings from entering the church, because it has the ability to leaven the whole lump. Then we see the love of God manifested in Paul's life. Love always thinks the best of others. Paul says, I have confidence in you through the Lord. He trusted that the Galatian saints would ultimately reject the teachings of the Judaizers, and he lets them know that the Judaizers would receive their judgment for spreading false teachings. All right, let's look at verses 11 through 14. And I, brethren, if I yet preach circumcision, why do I yet suffer persecution? Then is the offense of the cross ceased. I would they were even cut off which trouble you. For brethren, ye have been called unto liberty. Only use not liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. For all the law is fulfilled in one word, even in this, thou shalt love thy neighbor as thyself. Now, Paul says here, if I am preaching the same thing that the Judaizers are preaching, then why am I being persecuted and not them? If I were preaching the same teachings of the Judaizers, the offense of the cross would cease. The cross of Christ is an offense to all that man prides himself in. It is an offense to his morality, because it tells him his work cannot justify him. It is an offense to his philosophy, because it appeals to his faith and not to reason. It is an offense to the culture of man, because its truths are revealed to babes. It is an offense to his will, because it calls for an unconditional surrender. It is an offense to his pride, because it shows the exceeding sinfulness of the human heart. It is an offense to himself, because it tells him he must be born again. Then he goes on to say that he wished those Judaizers was removed from them. Then he tells them that they have been called to liberty, only not to use the liberty for an occasion to the flesh, but by love serve one another. Listen, we cannot allow ourselves to bring discredit to a life which God paid for with his own life. We are free, but our freedom is in accordance with God's will, which causes us to live a life that is above reproach and to walk in love. All right, let's look at verses 15 through 21. But if ye bite and devour one another, take heed that ye be not consumed one of another. This I say then, walk in the Spirit, and ye shall not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. For the flesh lusteth against the Spirit, and the Spirit against the flesh. And these are contrary the one to the other, so that ye cannot do the things that ye would. But if ye be led of the Spirit, ye are not under the law. Now the works of the flesh are manifest, which are these: adultery, fornication, uncleanness, lasciviousness, idolatry, witchcraft, hatred, variance, emulations, wrath, strife, seditions, heresies, envyings, murders, drunkenness, revelings, and such like, of the which I tell you before, as I have also told you in time past, that they which do such things shall not inherit the kingdom of God. Listen, if our lives stay in tune with God's will, we will never fulfill the works of the flesh. We must constantly yield ourselves to the Spirit and not fulfill the lusts of the flesh. All right, let's look at verses 22 and 23. But the fruit of the Spirit is love, joy, peace, long-suffering, gentleness, goodness, faith, meekness, temperance. Against such there is no law. Now here we see the 9 components that make up the fruit of the Spirit, and there is no law against them, and no law which will produce them. Verse number 24, and they that are Christ have crucified the flesh with the affections and lusts. Now, when was the flesh crucified? In Galatians chapter 2 and verse 20, Paul says, I am crucified with Christ. Nevertheless, I live, yet not I, but Christ liveth in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by the faith of the Son of God, who loved me and gave himself for me. When Christ was crucified, every believer was crucified at the same time. The believer is now joined to the living Christ, and the victory is not by struggling, but by surrendering to Jesus Christ. All right, verse 25. If we live in the Spirit, let us also walk in the Spirit. Now, we see 2 things here. Number 1, we live in the Spirit. That is our position. And number 2, our actions must match our position. All right, verse 26. Let us not be desirous of vainglory, provoking one another, envying one another. There are no big I's and little U's in the body of Jesus Christ. Paul instructs them to stay humble and to keep themselves from jealousy.